Today, some of our best segments from the global lane. COVID-19 origins. A new report by the Center for Security Policy concludes that the virus did not emerge naturally. A team of intelligence and security professionals, collectively known as Team B, state that significant circumstantial evidence exists that the virus was actually created in a Wuhan, China lab and then was deliberately unleashed on the world by the Chinese Communist Party. Well, here to explain is one of the authors of the new report, Peter Hoekstra. Mr. Hoekstra is Advisory Board Chairman of Center for Security Policy and the former chairman of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee. Okay, Congressman, I'm sure you've received a lot of criticism since this report was released. So some people are saying it's a conspiracy theory with little evidence to back it up. So what do you say?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of evidence, and that's why we brought this team together. We took a look at what had been said by the U.S. government, social media, the news media in general about the origins of COVID. What did they say? For a year and a half, they said, no way it came out of a lab. It developed naturally. A year and a half later, they said, well, you know what? Maybe it did come out of a lab. But what do we do know? Number one, the Chinese have a stated objective to take over and be the number one superpower in the world, removing the United States. The second thing we know is that they've been researching through gain-of-function research, through funds provided by Dr. Fauci at the Wuhan lab, things like the COVID virus. Third, when you research the virus scientifically, you understand very clearly that this thing did not evolve out of nature. There's a lot of evidence that says most likely this came out of the lab. But perhaps the most convincing item that China really wanted to export this virus to the rest of the world was what? In January of 2020, China allowed millions of Chinese to leave China at the same time that they were locking down Wuhan. They said, yeah, we've got this illness in Wuhan, but it doesn't transfer from human to human. The World Health Organization backed them up on that. It was a total lie. The Chinese knew better, but yet they made sure that they exported this virus intentionally to the rest of the world. You pull all of this together, and the result is, you know what? China, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is at war with America.
And to what extent was the United States then involved in that gain-of-function research at the lab? What did you find?
Well, I mean, we've never had an accountability from Fauci. He's stonewalled Congress. The Democrats have not gone in and tried to research exactly how much money went to which organizations. What did we actually do? We do know that money went to Wuhan. We do know that Chinese research scientists are thoroughly populated through our research labs here in the United States of America. You also heard about these labs in Ukraine. I'm looking forward to a Congress, an intelligence committee that actually does a deep dive into what the United States knew, what leaders in our health facilities knew, when did they know it, and did they actually facilitate or assist the Chinese in this attack against the United States of America?
But hasn't this also, Congressman, hurt the Chinese government as well and their economy? It's not just the U.S. and parts of the world.
Oh, it sure has. But remember, we have different philosophies. Americans, we value life. We as Christians, we value every single life. In the womb, life is essential and valuable in our way of life, in our society. In China, it's a throwaway. They kill prisoners to harvest organs. They've killed millions through their communist efforts. If they can move forward in taking down the United States of America, and it costs them millions of lives, they don't care. We do. It's cost 1 million American lives at this point. It's wreaked havoc with our economy. We need to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to get to it once we start holding China accountable. Remember, they've never shared information with us.
So why isn't the Biden administration then pushing China to allow a thorough investigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why is China going to see American oil flowing into China? Why are they going to see this president most likely lift a number of tariffs, including on solar panels?
Well, we saw the Hong Kong flu in the late 1960s, the SARS epidemic in 2003, bird flu 2006, and most recently COVID-19. So what are the chances that another virus with Chinese origins may be unleashed on the world in the years ahead? This may not be the end.
Of course not. It isn't the end. The Chinese, in their writings, their public speeches, they've said that biowarfare is something that they will consider, and it may be something that they will use. From our perspective, this COVID-19 is a test run. As they increase their capabilities, increase their sophistication with bioweapons, who knows where they may go. But we need to recognize the threat is real. The Chinese have used it, and they will use it again.
Okay, your findings are detailed in the book, The CCP Is at War with America. So where can people get a copy?
They can go to ccpatwar.com, and that's where they can get the book. And really, the objective of our effort is to expose this information to the American people, read the information, compare it to what you're seeing come from our own government, and you make the determination as to which one you believe and which one creates the most compelling case and most accurately reflects what they've seen over the last 2.5 years.
Well, you're the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. I think you know what you're talking about. Peter Hoekstra, Advisory Board Chairman now of the Center for Security Policy. Thank you, Congressman, for providing those insights. We appreciate it. Go Blue.
Hey, go Blue, and thank you for having me on, Gary.
As people around the world focus on putting gas in their tanks and food on their tables, China is on the move, slowly, methodically, moving to dominate world markets. Ignoring international sanctions, the Chinese Communist Party imported a record amount of Russian crude oil in May, nearly 2 million barrels a day. Our next guest says of greater concern to the future of the U.S. and Western security may be the CCP's dominance of rare earth metals. Luisa Moreno is president of Defense Metals Corporation, one of the largest mineral exploration companies in the world. Dr. Moreno, good to have you with us. So as the world moves forward to embrace alternative forms of energy, I'm assuming there's a greater demand for, say, lithium right now, which is used in making batteries for electric vehicles. Most people are probably unaware that China dominates the global lithium supply. So tell us more about that and why we should be concerned.
So China is the largest producer of about 20 plus metals, elements, materials that are critical for the green transition, and that includes lithium. They don't necessarily mine. They're not the largest miners of lithium, but they are the ones that processes the lithium to the battery grade that is required for electric vehicles. They also not the largest producer of, for instance, cobalt that comes from the DRC in Africa, but they account for the largest portion of processing as well. And then the other example is, of course, rare earth elements that Defense Metals, the company that I am part of, is a focus on. So rare earths don't go into batteries, but they go into permanent magnet motors, the electric motors for the electric vehicles. Those are the most efficient and strongest magnets known, and they are critical for electric vehicles as well. And China produces about 60% of rare earth elements, but processes, refines about 85%, including the 40,000 tons that comes from Mountain Pass in the United States, that is mined in the United States and is exported to China, but is refined.
Well, let's talk about the implications of this. Let's just say hypothetical scenario here. They invade Taiwan, the U.S. resists, and then they say, okay, we're going to stop processing all this stuff and you won't get it.
Well, it wouldn't be something new. There were suggestions in the past that back in 2010, due to disputes, territorial disputes between China and Japan, that China threatened to halt exports of rare earths to Japan. That is well known, is documented, and then fortunately things got resolved. So can we end up in a similar situation? I surely hope not, because China does control 85% of the refining, and much higher percentages for some of the more critical elements that go into the electric vehicles, as well as wind turbines and some defense applications as well. So that would be of great concern if we go into a situation of conflict, or if we see a situation of conflict between the US and China over Taiwan, for instance. And there is certainly danger or risk that China might do that, especially if there is sanctions against China.
Let's look at some specifics here. What's the potential threat to U.S. national security and Western defenses then?
Oh, it's huge. It's very large. Now, granted, the defense industry has a very large budget, and they probably will be trying to recover these elements at very extremely high costs to get them. So it's not impossible to get them, but it would be at extremely ridiculous cost. So because again, China, some of these elements, like I said, China controls 100% of the production. And so there is a ridiculously high risk. Of course, I think US keeps they stockpile some of these critical materials, but beyond that period where they can, utilize the stockpiles, there will be really significant costs of development of that supply chain in order to secure that for defense applications.
And I've got to ask you about uranium. It's a very important component for nuclear weapons systems, and you're well versed in the Uranium One decision when the Obama administration signed off on the sale of that Canadian mining company to Russia. Today, despite the war in Ukraine, nearly half of U.S. uranium supply is purchased from Russia, its partners in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. How concerned should we be about that, uranium?
Yes, uranium is another important element for the energy transition that is important in CO2. So it is important effectively for the West, for the rest of the world, to be looking at diversifying, where we get these materials, and uranium is one of them for sure.
Okay, Dr. Luisa Moreno, President of Defense Metals Corporation, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate it. Here on the home front, taxpayer dollars to support drag queen shows in New York City public schools and libraries. $200,000 worth. Johnny can't read, but he can learn how to dress up in drag and strut his stuff. Parents in the Big Apple are shocked, but our next guests are not surprised. They say this is just one example of how progressives have replaced traditional instruction in American public schools. Pete Hegseth is a New York Times bestselling author and co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. And David Goodwin is founder of the Ambrose School in Boise, Idaho, and editor of the Classical Difference magazine. They've co-authored the new book, just out, Battle for the American Mind, Uprooting a Century of Miseducation. Let's begin with you, Pete. I've read the book. I must say what surprised me is how this transformation began years ago. The replacement of classical education in public schools just didn't happen overnight. And I know in the book you tell how Marxists from the Frankfurt School of Social Theory fled Nazi Germany, brought their ideas to America. Also, John Dewey advanced critical theory here. So briefly explain for our viewers how we arrived at this point.
Gary, you're right. It happened gradually, and then it happened suddenly, as Hemingway would put it. And when David and I both approached this topic, our assumption was maybe it was a product of the 60s at first, and it quickly became clear that this was even before the Frankfurt School, when the Marxists showed up with critical theory. John Dewey and early progressives in the early 20th century made school their intentional target because they understood the affections, the education of our youngest minds were the most important if they were going to change the social fabric, the social construct of America, which was their goal from the beginning. These were all atheists. These were all socialists, or almost all of them were. And their goal was social change. And they knew the schoolroom was the place they could do it. And it started with the removal of God. It happened over 100 years ago, which is why, as you pointed out, neither David nor I are surprised when you see the kind of lunacy we see today.
And David, tell us more. I know it wasn't just with the schools. What effect did the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Earl Warren have on public education in America?
Well, that was the capstone of the progressive model and the progressive intent. They had the courts under their control by the early 1960s, and through a series of Supreme Court cases, they gradually took prayer out of school. They then took the Bible out of school, and they then forbid really any teaching of Christian instruction in school. But that was the kind of the capstone of a long effort. It wasn't the beginning, it was really the end. The beginning was in about 1915 or thereabouts, when they set out intentionally with the Gary Plan and with several other initiatives to sideline Christianity. And then obviously once they had orphaned it, they could push it to the side, and they had full control of the classroom at that point.
Pete, you suggested that starting in the 1920s, classical Christian education was replaced with nationalism, the pledge, country. All have merit, but they have weaknesses because God is taken out of the classroom. And today it's progressed to the pledge without God, government instead of country, equity instead of equality, vocational training over reasoning, values instead of virtue, morality without Judeo-Christian religious faith. Explain a little more for us.
Well said by you. Ultimately, it was a shift from seeking truth through God to seeking truth or validation to government. It's not the ideas of good and healthy patriotism or fidelity to your country or appreciation for the founding in 1776 and those ideas. It was allegiance to the state. And you mentioned the Pledge of Allegiance. We look at our Pledge of Allegiance, at least we do as conservatives and patriots, and say, hey, that's a great thing, under God. Well, the original pledge was written in the late 19th century by a socialist who ultimately wrote it without under God, because the pledge was meant to shift kids away comfortably from God at the center of the classroom, the cross at the center, to the flag at the center of the classroom, which was an easier sell to parents at the time. And now, of course, fast forward to today, and they're happy to get rid of the flag, kneel for the anthem, get rid of the pledge. Prayer long gone. Now patriotism is the next target as they move toward their woke social justice, frankly, culturally Marxist agenda in our classroom.
And Pete, you and I are both followers of Jesus. You talk about how this paideia means, quote, history is rejected, science is God, the state is the temple, which citizen workers worship. So as journalists, we deal every day with the political, but beyond politics here, it seems there's a well-devised strategy that is really a spiritual one. What do you think?
It was spiritual from the beginning, and I'd love to have David chime in on this as well. Paideia is an ancient Greek word that's long forgotten. It doesn't even have a direct translation in English, but it's throughout our book. In fact, David's the one that really put the meat on the bones of the Western Christian paideia. You see, we fight in terms of politics now and may win incremental battles here or there. What the left understood is they had to go at the heart of what made us who we are. What do we value? What's our vision of the good life? What do we consider our virtues? And when they targeted that, they targeted at the foundation of who we really are, really the current underneath the top waters of the stream. If culture's the top waters, the current is paideia underneath, and they targeted that.
Yes, I think if we turn to Ephesians 6, it's a great chapter that kind of encapsulates the responsibilities and the upbringing of pretty much all the classes of society at the time. But it says, fathers, raise your children in the, and there's a whole bunch of words that are used there, education, instruction. The two that are most commonly used are fear and admonition. All of those are derived from the one word paideia. So it's a command of our Lord.
The book is Battle for the American Mind, Uprooting a Century of Miseducation. I recommend it. I've read it. It's wonderful. Pete Hegseth, David Goodwin, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Gary, thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Just hours after the tragic Independence Day parade shooting in Illinois, Vice President Kamala Harris renewed the call for a federal assault weapons ban.
We need to end this horror. We need to stop this violence.
But folks, new laws won't end this death wave that has overtaken America. We can only turn things around by promoting morality and the sanctity of life. Before the Illinois parade killings, Top Chef celebrity Padma Lakshmi tweeted out her thoughts about Independence Day with the hashtag #NotAHappy4th. She posted a meme that read, "Separate church and state." Yes, we must protect churches from the state, but we must not separate our nation from the morals and belief system upon which it was founded. There'd be fewer mass shootings if we restored godly principles to American classrooms. Let's start by teaching the 10 Commandments, guiding principles to maintain a moral society. Unfortunately, today, many schools prohibit 10 Commandment displays, and then we wonder why kids are getting shot up in inner cities and schools, or innocent spectators are being killed in parades. Do you teach your children or grandchildren these? Restoring civility and morality to America begins by honoring the first two. Number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said these are the most important. If we embrace and practice these, then everything else will follow, like not stealing or not killing. So let's pray for a national awakening. Tragic killings like the 4th of July Highland Park, Illinois shooting will not end with new gun laws. Only when we turn to God and truly love Him and one another will our nation be united in peace. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, social media, and our broadcast affiliates. And until next time, be blessed.